here in France.
Amid the West Asia crisis that refuses to abate, the world is grappling with the biggest energy crisis as the Strait of Hormuz continues to be in a chokehold. When no side is ready to back down, how will the G7 leaders find a solution to this unending conflict?
I'm Megha Sharma and I'm bringing you all the news and updates from the G7 AVIA 2026 Summit only on NewsX World.
Hello and welcome, I'm Thomas Porteous and you're watching The World Report here on NewsX World. Let's first take a look at the top headlines leading this hour. The United States and Iran strike a historic framework deal to end their war, as President Trump declares the agreement complete. The pact, brokered by Pakistan, heads to Switzerland for formal signing this Friday. The vital Strait of Hormuz prepares to reopen after months of blockade as part of the new US-Iran agreement. President Trump declares ships can start their engines once again and, quote, let the oil flow from Friday. Meanwhile, Iran's nuclear program moves to the center of upcoming talks as Washington seeks the dismantling of Tehran's enriched uranium stockpile. Iranian officials insist any deal must also deliver sanctions relief and the release of frozen assets. This comes after oil prices tumble more than 4% as news of the US-Iran breakthrough sends markets soaring. Brent crude slides sharply while stock markets around the world rally in hopes of a lasting peace. Lebanon remains the flashpoint of the ceasefire as Israel vows to keep its forces in the south despite the new agreement. Iran demands a complete halt to Israeli strikes while displaced families begin cautiously returning home. Over in Europe, a historic Kiev monastery burns after a massive overnight Russian assault on the Ukrainian capital, killing 9 in the process. Moscow denies striking the site directly, blaming the damage on a Ukrainian Patriot missile during the barrage. In the UK, Britain moves to ban social media for all children under 16 as Prime Minister Starmer pledges to protect young people's well-being. The sweeping announcement follows similar moves across Australia and Europe to curb children's online access. In Scandinavia, the stepson of Norway's Crown Prince Haakon is found guilty of rape and domestic violence. The court sentences him to 4 years in prison after a 7-week trial that has shaken the royal family's image. Those are your top stories for the hour. We're turning to the leading story. The United States and Iran have reportedly finalized a comprehensive peace framework to end their intense 3-month war. The sweeping agreement establishes an immediate and permanent termination of military operations across all active fronts. Let's break down what we know so far. The Iranian media has published what it says are the 14 clauses of a proposed memorandum of understanding with Washington, outlining sweeping demands ahead of any formal negotiations. According to reports, Iran is seeking the release of $12 billion in frozen assets before talks begin, with another $12 billion to be made available during a 60-day window for final negotiations. The document also calls for the suspension of oil and petrochemical sanctions and the lifting of what it describes as a naval blockade within 30 days. The reported terms state that Washington would commit to non-interference in Iranian affairs and refrain from imposing new sanctions or deploying additional forces during the negotiation period. They also call for an immediate ceasefire across all fronts, including in Lebanon. Under the proposal, the Strait of Hormuz would reopen within 30 days under arrangements managed by Iran. On the nuclear issue, Tehran is said to reaffirm its commitment under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty not to pursue nuclear weapons, while seeking a final agreement focused on sanctions relief and nuclear-related matters within 60 days. The reported memorandum also says that the US and its allies would be expected to present reconstruction plans worth at least $300 billion. Notably, Iran's missile program and its support for regional resistance groups are excluded from the agenda under the reported terms. The document further states that no final negotiations would begin until the initial $12 billion is released, oil sanctions are suspended, and the blockade is lifted. Finally, the proposal envisages the creation of a supervisory mechanism to oversee implementation, with any eventual agreement requiring approval through a UN Security Council resolution. Joining us now is Hamid Vahidi, an Iranian-Australian community leader. He joins us live from Sydney to discuss this breakthrough. Sir, thank you very much for joining us here on NewsX World. And so, it has happened, a significant announcement from the US president. Tehran and Washington seem to have agreed to a framework for a deal. This isn't a final and lasting peace agreement, but it certainly is on the right track. Also, please, viewers, bear in mind that we don't yet have a final release from the Americans or the Pakistanis. These are reports from the Iranian media. I want to come to you now, sir, listing some of the points that we just have had, including the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz, the unfreezing of Iranian assets, $12 billion worth. Who comes out on top here, the Americans or Iran, after 3 months of war?
It's first of all, thanks, Thomas, for having me. I think it's a complicated situation again. If you look at the conditions that you've seen released by the Islamic Republic, you see that the Islamic Republic has won the deal. So it's a very sweet deal for Iranians. They're getting their money back. They're getting the control of the Strait of Hormuz. That was an open, free passage before the start of the war. Now it is controlled by Iranians and Omanis. They are putting the conditions to even start the final negotiations, and they're basically forcing everything that they want. And the nuclear program, it was said that they won't be allowed to have nuclear program at all. Now they're talking about we have the nuclear program, but up until a certain percentage, like 3% enrichment of uranium. So it's a sweet deal for the Islamic Republic, but you can look at it from a different angle as well. So Iran has lost his leaders, most of his military leaders, the supreme leader as well. It was attacked for 40 days, a lot of damages and a lot of loss, financial loss, and also credibility, and military bases, the whole Navy, the Air Force, and everything else. Now they are accepting to go to negotiation, to go to a MOU, a ceasefire. So it's in another case, it's a defeat for Islamic Republic as well. So instead of continuing the war, instead of retaliating and pushing forward and winning, they are agreeing to just talk and do the ceasefire.
Apologies. How significant is it that the nuclear issue hasn't been discussed really as of yet? Obviously it's been discussed, but a final strategy hasn't been agreed upon, and the Iranians have had their sanctions lifted.
Yes, I think that's very telling. That I was coming to this point that this whole MOU is not it's not a permanent peace treaty. It's just a temporary measurement to keep everything calm. So many big things that are happening in the U.S. and in the world just pass through. One of the reasons is the nuclear issue. This whole war started because of the nuclear program of Iran and the ballistic missile program of Iran. And there is no talk about these things. And there is no way that American side give $12 billion now, and in next 60 days another $12 billion to Iran, and they expect Islamic Republic not building any more ballistic missiles and any more, nuclear weapons and stuff like that. That's one side. The other side is the human rights. One of the issues that President Trump pressed on at the beginning in January was the killing of more than 40,000 people in two nights in January. And that hasn't been discussed during this, a few items that you mentioned at the beginning, that is released by the Iranian side. So human rights is being forgotten as well. So all of these are very telling that these MOU, this is just a temporary measure for maybe few days, few weeks, until something bigger is happening, and we hear like bigger news. And I don't think that the American side will cope with this kind of deal.
Can we talk about Lebanon briefly? How likely do you think it is that ceasefire holds? We've seen a ceasefire announced previously, only for hostilities to continue. We've now seen over 3,500 people killed inside Lebanon, even post ceasefire. That's actually more people that have been killed in Lebanon than there has been inside Iran over the past 3 months. How likely do you think it is that the Israelis adhere to this deal and continue to not strike particularly Beirut, which we just saw within the past 24 hours and could have possibly seen this deal never signed?
You touched on a very important point, Thomas. I think Lebanon should be part of this MOU, and the other leg of this MOU should be Israel, which we have seen the news coming out of different channels from Israel that they say we are not bound by the items that you put in the MOU. So the Iranian side, the Islamic Republic, expects Israel doesn't attack Lebanon or any of the proxies of Islamic Republic, and Israel is saying that we are not bound by that item. And we're seeing that no officials from Israeli side, has said anything from last night. From the time that this announcement went out by President Trump and the Prime Minister of the Pakistan, no one from Israel has said anything. So it means that they are not fully on board with this. It could be a show. It could be just that they're playing with something, but it could be that they're not totally on board. And it means that the fight and the attacks on Lebanon will continue to happen, and they won't honor this MOU. Just one correction there. You said that there were 3,000 people killed in Lebanon. That could be the number, but you continue to say that it was more than what has happened in Iran. In Iran, the number that were killed, the victims, in just 2 nights was more than 40,000 people. So it's 440. It's a lot more. So
I was comparing post February when the war broke out.
Understand.
Okay. Mr. Hamid, do stay with us. We're now turning over to some American reactions to the framework. News of it is triggering strong responses across Washington and the Middle East. President Donald Trump has declared the deal now complete, announcing the lifting of the US naval blockade and calling for the Strait of Hormuz to be opened, saying, "Let the oil flow." He claims the agreement will secure long-term regional peace, though officials stress it begins a 60-day negotiation phase for a final nuclear accord. Vice President Vance has called it a historic turning point, while Pentagon officials say Iran's enriched uranium will remain under strict international inspection. The deal, reportedly mediated by Pakistan and Qatar, is expected to be formally signed in Switzerland on June the 19th. Reactions remain sharply divided. Israeli Minister Bezalel Smotrich has warned it weakens regional security, while US lawmakers are split between cautious support and criticism, with some calling it politically risky and others demanding greater transparency. Joining us once again is my esteemed guest, Mr. Vahidi. Now, let's take a look back at some of Donald Trump's achievements. Some would look at them otherwise. When it comes to diplomacy and peace deals, Donald Trump phrased and entitled his Gaza ceasefire deal "Peace in the Middle East for all eternity," according to him. That is not quite what we have seen. We've seen other negotiated peace deals with these huge signing ceremonies, including that of Thailand and Cambodia and the DRC and Rwanda, all of which have seemingly not had steady foundations and more or less fallen at the first hurdle when time tested. Do you think this deal is different? And one has to emphasize that it's not a lasting peace deal. It is indeed just, in fact, the start of a 60-day negotiating period. What do you think of some of the responses pouring in around it?
Of course, I don't think this is any different from the other deals, and many of those other deals, including the one in Gaza and other places in the Middle East, they are very much related to this particular war and operations and deal that is happening right now with Iran. And we know that the head of the snake is the Islamic Republic. The IRGC that is leading all of those proxies in Lebanon, in Gaza, in other places in Syria, and so this deal won't be kept permanently if it's with this situation and halfway done. A lot of unresolved situations, a lot of unresolved issues that the whole war started because of those. So it is deemed to break, and I would expect that we will see something much bigger in future. It could be financial, it could be military operations or war or something like that, or it could be just financial measures.
In terms of the domestic reaction, of course, this deal doesn't really appease a lot of people. As you've mentioned, the human rights inside Iran is still in question. You have these neoconservatives inside the United States who think Donald Trump hasn't done enough. You have the Israelis, of course, who wanted to continue this war. And you also have people which counts for the vast amount of the US population, which believes Donald Trump shouldn't have gone to war in the first place. They view this as a completely unsuccessful operation when it comes to Donald Trump's action here. How do you think Trump can indeed make this look like a win for him?
I don't think it was a total failure. I think it was, as long as you believe that this is one step in a bigger plan, and there is a plan, I hope so. You don't bring three large ships and a lot of soldiers and a lot of ammunition to a region and start a war for 40 days without having a plan. We can't believe that. And this is just one step in that. If you think it that way, this is not a failure. This was a planned ceasefire. This was just pressing the Islamic Republic, putting a lot of pressure by military operation and then by financial operation, by seizing the assets and freezing the assets, keeping the oil not flowing and stuff. Now they're releasing some of those, not to Islamic Republic, but to the world. So the whole world can get some of the oil out. 600 ships are being kept hostage in Persian Gulf. They can just ship out of the region, and a lot of things can be untangled during these few days or weeks or 60 days even. And so there will be more chances to continue the operation. But
yes,
back to your first point, I don't think President Trump has done yet anything about the human rights and for the people of Iran, and just to further the democracy beliefs that he has, and the whole U.S. and Israel started to think about, and they should do more.
Mr. Hamid Vahidi, thank you so much for joining us. Unfortunately, we have run out of time, but pleasure to speak to you here on the broadcast. We'll, of course, be continuing as reactions pour in from around the globe. We hit the economic implications now. Global financial markets are reacting with an explosive relief rally following the announcement of the historic interim peace deal between the US and Iran. The agreement, aimed at ending the 3-month-old conflict and fully reopening the strategic Strait of Hormuz, has completely transformed global sentiment. On Wall Street, futures surged across the board, with the S&P 500 up over 1%, while over in Asia, Japan's Nikkei index skyrocketed, closing a massive 5% higher. The biggest shockwave hit the energy sector, where the fear of major supply disruptions has completely faded. Crude oil prices plunged instantly, with Brent crude tumbling nearly 5% to around $83 a barrel. And WTI crude dropping over 5% to sit just above the $80 mark. As geopolitical risks ease, the US dollar is weakening against major global pairs, while emerging market currencies are strengthening. Investors are aggressively pivoting back into equities, viewing this truce as a massive economic turning point. Joining us now from the newsroom is Pratiksha Singh, the correspondent for NewsX World. Pratiksha, what more can you tell us about the implications of this peace deal and how stocks have rallied?
Thomas, yes, much to everybody's excitement, the crude oil prices have definitely plunged, and we can see a very happier look in the markets. If you see the European ones or the Asian markets, they are looking much better than as we compare to previous 3 months, and even the oil prices have dropped down to the 2-3 months low. So yes, this is the first time this low the crude oil prices have gone. Primarily because of the opening of Strait of Hormuz. We know that 1/5 of the oil of global oil supply was passing through the strait, and because of the whole war, this was the primary reason why the crude oil was definitely surging. So now that the peace deal is out there, although the investors are still very cautious, because we know that anything can happen anytime given the current state of affairs that are going. We know that they can turn anytime.
Thank you very much, Pratiksha, for bringing us that information. We're now turning to a dynamic day of fallout from the sudden US-Iran peace framework, which is triggering intense strategic questions across Europe. The breakthrough bilateral diplomacy, which successfully produced the Islamabad Memorandum while bypassing traditional European Union channels, has sparked fierce debate in Brussels over whether the bloc's foreign policy relevance is being marginalised. For frontline Baltic states like Estonia, the focus is shifting to economics. If the truce successfully depresses global energy prices, policymakers face immediate pressure to funnel that financial relief directly into expanding national defence budgets to counter future security threats. Meanwhile, a French-led regulatory push inside the G7 for strict artificial intelligence safety rules is raising alarms over that regulation, which could inadvertently stifle agile digital-first tech hubs like Estonia's. To discuss all of this, we're now joined by Andrei Korobenik, a member of the Riigikogu, Estonia's parliament. Thank you very much for joining us here on the broadcast. It's a great pleasure to speak to you in the Estonian capital. Let's get straight into this. Donald Trump has, of course, just announced a breakthrough agreement with Iran, but it bypassed these traditional EU multilateral channels. Does this unilateral US diplomacy sideline the EU's foreign policy relevance?
Well, it's not the first time Trump actually announced the agreement. So, I mean, European Union is, of course, hopeful that the tensions will end because it hurts the trade basically worldwide. And we still rely on United States as our partner. But of course, the world and the world markets need predictability at this point. So yeah, we hope this conflict will end soon.
If the Middle East framework successfully lowers global energy prices in time to come, should Estonia and its EU partners immediately funnel that economic relief into reinforcing defence spending due to future possible threats?
Well, Estonia is actually, it's part of NATO, and we already commit more than this 3% threshold that is target for NATO countries. So we are bordering with Russia, and we are investing in local, we spend money on local defense, and we continue that. We try to spend money in a way that boosts innovation and brings high-tech companies into our defense sector. But basically, I think the current situation about Iran is not something that changed our course. But of course, the prices for energy are also an issue for us. We have small and dependent energy market, and this is also one of the reasons we hope the conflict will end soon. In summer, it's not that difficult to get cheap energy in our region, but winters are cold, and the prices this winter were.
Paris is pushing the envelope at the G7, which is going on right now, for stronger artificial intelligence safety rules and regulations. Are you concerned this regulatory push will stifle smaller digital-first tech hubs like Estonia?
We have issues with AI regulations in the European Union in general. It's pretty tough, and it's really difficult to attract high-tech companies into European Union jurisdiction. So I really hope that at some point there will be worldwide regulations on AI, because that's basically the only way to regulate AI. Companies are always looking for favorable jurisdictions.
The US, of course, claims the Islamabad memorandum guarantees nuclear curbs on Tehran, but major technical details are deferred to a 60-day window. Given your background, how skeptical should we be of Iran's willingness to actually dismantle its infrastructure during this pause?
Well, I guess it's the position of Iran actually should be reflected in this potential agreement. I don't know whether it's gonna be concluded tomorrow, or is it gonna take a few more months? But of course, the nuclear power in the this options for the regimes that are not very stable are a threat for the region and for the whole world. So I believe some form of agreement is happening. But what is there exactly? I mean, I don't, personally have any preference. Maybe the some regulations on site will also do the job. Maybe Iran will, decide to stop any developments in this area. I think it may not be decided at this point yet. I hope Trump this time actually means that the agreement is close, but I personally have no idea if that's so.
And do you think that the G7 should accept any framework whatsoever that allows Iran to economically or operationally regulate the vital international shipping lane, which is the Strait of Hormuz, in exchange for peace?
Yeah, any agreement that brings stability into the region is actually a good thing. Of course, the current world economy is really agile. So if one pass is closed, then the new ones are developed pretty fast. We saw that in case of Russian energy, which is a huge part of energy market before the war in Ukraine, and now basically it's been substituted by other countries, at least in terms of European Union energy supply. So I think if the conflict in Iran will take a few more months, then probably workarounds will be in place. But of course, Estonia is really hoping that some positive solution happens, and any players, including of course G7, are vital in terms of concluding any agreement that lasts, because any temporary solution is not always the good way of resolving this conflict. We probably need something that will last for a few years, even after the Trump is not president of the United States, or even after some other G7 countries change their position.
Sir, thank you very much for joining us. Great pleasure to get your insight here on the broadcast. But that is all that we have time for this hour. Keep watching NewsX World for more international news updates.
World leaders are gathering at the G7 summit taking place here in France. As Iran and the United States agreed to a ceasefire, world leaders welcome the Iran-US peace deal. The G7 leaders get into a huddle with the Gulf heads of states. Can G7 ensure the ceasefire holds? I'm Megha Sharma, and I'm bringing you all the news and updates from the G7 AVIA 2026 summit only on NewsX World.
आज का भारत सिर्फ आगे नहीं बढ़ रहा, भारत खुद को नेक्स्ट लेवल पर ले जा रहा है.
Together with my friend Prime Minister Modi, who I was pleased to see again last night, we took on our bilateral relationship and raised it to its highest level ever.
We need new answers. That's why we are coming to India.
And as a citizen of Nepal, India's closest neighbor, I feel a deep sense of pride and optimism seeing this stride.
and welcome. I'm Ellie Richardson and you are watching The World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top headlines of this hour. The US and Iran said they have agreed terms to end the war and reopen the Strait of Hormuz, news that brought relief to markets worldwide, although the pact may hinge on events in Lebanon and defer tricky talks on Tehran's nuclear program. US President Donald Trump said that many ships loaded with oil are starting to move out of the Strait of Hormuz. Monitoring ships are now starting to move and many loaded up with oil out of the strait. They are going along the Southern Highway, said in Trump's Truth Social post. US Vice President JD Vance said that he hopes the text of an agreement to halt the war in Iran and open the Strait of Hormuz will be released this week, as further negotiations over the deal's details were set to continue. Vance also said the United States expects economically vital waterway would be opened without tolls on a long-term basis. Lebanon remains the flashpoint of the ceasefire as Israel vows to keep its forces in the south despite the new agreement. Iran demands a complete halt to Israeli strikes while displaced families begin cautiously returning home. France and Britain are pushing plans for a multinational naval mission to safeguard shipping through the Strait of Hormuz if a US-Iran ceasefire materializes, although it is doubtful whether Tehran would be prepared to accept any such operation. Diplomats say Iran has signaled strong opposition to any foreign military presence in the waterway. A historic Kyiv monastery burns after a massive overnight Russian assault on the Ukrainian capital, killing 9 in the process. Moscow denies striking the site directly, blaming the damage of a Ukrainian Patriot missile during the barrage. Britain moves to ban social media for all children under 16 as Prime Minister Keir Starmer pledges to protect young people's well-being. The sweeping announcement follows similar moves across Australia and Europe to curb children's online access. The stepson of Norway's Crown Prince Haakon is found guilty of rape and domestic violence. The court sentenced him to 4 years in prison after a 7-week trial that has shaken the royal family's image. Global leaders are arriving in Evian-les-Bains, France, as the high-stakes 52nd G7 summit officially gets underway, just hours after the monumental announcement of the US-Iran peace framework. Transatlantic allies, including British Prime Minister Keir Starmer, are seeking critical common ground with President Donald Trump regarding the sudden Middle East breakthrough and the scheduled reopening of the Strait of Hormuz. Arriving for the summit, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen and European Council President Antonio Costa held a joint news conference to address the deal. While von der Leyen welcomed the potential path towards regional stability, she drew a firm line for Europe, explicitly declaring that Iran must fundamentally change its behaviour before the European Union considers lifting any existing sanctions. Listen in.
So we have a framework of sanctions that is responding to 2 main features. The one is the violation of human rights, and the other one is mass destruction, weapons of mass destruction. And the principle of sanctions is that we need real change on the ground before we can think about lifting them. Sanctions are in place to change behavior. So if behavior is changing credibly and verifiably, then you can lift sanctions. But the other way around is also true. As long as there is no behavioral change, you cannot lift the sanctions because of human rights violation and weapons of mass destruction.
The summit's opening day also featured key global outreach, with French President Emmanuel Macron and EU leaders welcoming Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva to the summit to participate in broader talks on global security and economic imbalances. We are now being joined by Dr. Elizabeth Larousse, who is a Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Taiwan Fellow and a visiting fellow at the National Shangxi University, joining us live from Washington, D.C. Thank you so much for joining us here today on the coverage of the G7 here on NewsX. Well, it's an absolute pleasure being able to have you on. Thank you. Now, with this G7 summit, leaders have arrived and they are all welcoming this decision and the news of the breakthrough with the Iran-US deal, which is apparently being signed very soon. How crucial is this moment now, especially at the start of this G7 summit, given the fact that this would have been a topic of conversation?
Well, Trump comes to this meeting in a very, very good position, quite triumphant. I suppose he just hosted a UFC wrestling match at the White House that was just filled with testosterone and bravado and a lot of Americana. And then an announcement of this interim agreement. Remember, like, we don't even have the details, right? A lot of it is speculation at this point. We have some idea of what the MOU, which is going to be signed apparently in Switzerland on Friday, indicates. But he comes, essentially he takes the wind out of the sails, out of any conversation that would have carried a sense of like nervousness about was the United States going? Where is Europe going? Where is the world economy going? He comes in with like cheers and like, okay, we're going to get this done. The oil's going to flow again. This is a great thing. Let's see, how we can move forward on this whole process so that, the global economy can recover from a bit of a setback that the Iran war has presented.
Macron has said on arrival that the goal for this G7 is for finding common solutions and ease global tensions. But he also said France is ready to send ships also to the Strait of Hormuz, and also said that they are ready to be there. Has there been any reaction from the US delegation to France potentially putting this idea out there, given the fact that, like you said, Trump has gone into this very beaming because of this breakthrough?
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, not being there, it's kind of hard to read the tea leaves. However, I can say that the Trump administration had wanted the G7 countries, wanted European countries to be much more involved than they were in this Iran crisis, particularly regarding the Straits of Hormuz. He had, wanted to use airspace of Spain and other countries when he was militarily attacking Iran, and some of those countries had denied airspace and use of certain facilities. And so Trump was very, very perhaps embittered regarding Europe's response to the war. So now if France is saying, okay, we're willing to participate, I think that would go down very well with President Trump.
Of course. And we've also heard from von der Leyen welcomed the potential path towards regional stability. She drew a firm line for Europe, however, and she explicitly declared that Iran must fundamentally change its behaviour before the European Union considers lifting any existing sanctions. What she also went on to say that this is to make sure for the better good of the EU. Now, what do you think more is going to happen from this statement made by Ursula von der Leyen?
Yes, I heard that statement. Now, I believe that she was referring to like general sanctions on Iran, American, U.S. sanctions that were placed on Iran years ago. This MOU, this interim, peace agreement, which will be revealed in its entirety on Friday, mostly addresses the Straits of Hormuz closing and crisis. From what I'm hearing, it may not even deal with much of the nuclear problem. And that was the original genesis or impetus of U.S. military attack against Iran. It was to stop their nuclear program, but also, you remember last year and in January, when the regime in Iran was slaughtering protesters, the U.S. said, keep it up, we will essentially come to your defense, and then was rather late, to the party there. And so this MOU deals with the most recent pile of questions and issues rather than the earlier sanctions that were put in place years ago. So that's a different ball of wax to be dealt with.
And as G7 leaders engage with partners such as Brazilian president we've heard have just arrived, is this summit evolving beyond a traditional Western forum into a broader platform for addressing global security challenges, economic imbalances and changing geopolitical order?
It is possible, though it looks like there is no real argument, there's no momentum to change the general structure of the G7. Not only must you be a significant, economic power, but also a democracy. And so bringing another democracy into the sidelines, Brazil, has a certain amount of economic clout. It also has a lot of natural resources. It has minerals. It has rare earth types of minerals that the West now wants. China has almost a lock on that supply chain. So it makes sense to bring them into the sidelines. But as far as widening the circle, formally widening the circle, I don't see that happening, and I don't see an argument for that right now.
And do you think President Donald Trump can persuade the G7 partners to back his approach towards Iran, or will European leaders insist on a more cautious, condition-based strategy like they have been whilst this war has been occurring?
I don't think Europe is going to, change their stripes. Europe will be Europe. America's America and Trump is Trump, right? And so, but as you said, France kind of volunteering that they would get involved. And we have to see how much involved. Is it one ship, two ships? What do they mean? Yeah, so I think President Trump would like them to participate a lot more than they probably are willing to. Any participation, though, broadens the coalition, which puts more pressure on Iran to get beyond this MOU and deal with the thornier issues.
And at a time when global institutions face increasing scrutiny, can G7 still act as an effective forum for coordinating response to major international crises, or is its influence diminishing at all?
I don't know if the G7 does a lot regarding international issues. Generally, the meeting itself is glad-handing, backslapping, cocktail parties. As a group, are they effective in shaping the world economy? That's questionable. Certainly, each of the members have their own economic power. They also have their own economic problems. And so when it comes to crises or economic issues, very often it's nationalism first. And so, that's a good question on how much leverage they have.
And beyond the immediate focus on Iran, what should success look like for this G7 summit? A unified position on Middle East stability, a roadmap for economic cooperation, or a broader vision for managing an increasingly multipolar world?
Oh, I think the more urgent issues, honestly, are tariffs and trade. Each country at the G7 has been hit by Trump's tariffs. And so they will want to talk about those individually, but also in concert. Another thing out there is the Ukraine war continues. I understand Zelensky will meet with President Trump. He's not a member, obviously, of the G7, but he will be there because it's an opportunity. Climate is always an issue. China may be discussed. Briefly, a number of these countries are very increasingly more wary of China's military, but also economic influence. China wants to sell cars in Europe, and Germany seems open to that. And that is a threat to any automotive industry in Europe. So those are the other issues that will be discussed.
And obviously you mentioned Ukraine in there, that we know Zelensky will be arriving. In his big moment on arrival for Ukraine session, where Trump is, like you said, reportedly going to be presented with a 5-point peace framework drafted by the UK, France and Germany. Is there any early signal, do you think, of how this is going to go down, how this is going to come about, and about how the US delegation would be approaching that?
The U.S. has not been as focused on Ukraine as it has Iran, obviously. And so I don't know. Again, I have to see more of the details. I haven't seen the details of that framework. I believe the United States will continue, honestly, the policy that it has up until now. Things a bit as at arm's length. You know, we have sold arms, sometimes through third parties. There has been a significant amount of financial, dedication, investment. But as far as involvement goes, I think the United States is probably going to still keep Ukraine somewhat at arm's length.
Elizabeth, Dr. Elizabeth, thank you so much for joining us here for this special of the G7 coverage here on News X World. Thank you. Now, we are being joined by Megha Sharma, who is a senior executive editor for News X World, who is currently in Evian in France at the G7 summit. Megha, thank you so much for joining us here on the channel. Now, what is going on right now? Can you tell us? We have heard that President Donald Trump has landed and there are talks going on right now between leaders. Please, what more can you tell us?
Right. So yes, sir, President Trump has arrived. He has landed near Evian. He is headed to Hotel Royal. In terms of the engagements that he will be involved in, he is going to be holding a bilateral meeting with the French President Emmanuel Macron. But besides that, there is also a bilateral that is being held right now between French President Emmanuel Macron and the Brazilian counterpart Lula da Silva. There are other heads of the governments that have also arrived from the G7 countries, which includes Keir Starmer from the United Kingdom. We also have, the European Union President Ursula von der Leyen, along with the EU Commissioner, who gave a press briefing just a short while before they commenced on the number of meetings that are lined up. There is, in fact, going to be a G7 family photo that takes place later in the day today. Of course, we are also awaiting the arrival of the Japanese Prime Minister Sane Takaichi. So these leaders are going to be arriving at the end of the day. In fact, all G7 leaders will be gathered over here in Evian in France. In fact, with regards to the bilaterals that US President Donald Trump is going to have, there are going to be few and select ones. He has already had one, which is customary to hold that bilateral talk with the host country, which is France and its leader, Emmanuel Macron. But besides that, he's also going to be holding a bilateral, an important one with India, which is going to be held tomorrow between Prime Minister Modi and President Trump. And then, of course, there are the four G7, the four Gulf nations that have also been invited. So those meetings between President Trump and the heads of states of Qatar, UAE, Saudi Arabia and Egypt is scheduled as well. We're also getting to know, as per sources, that while the invitation has been sent to all the 4 Gulf nations, there may be a likelihood that Saudi Arabia skips this visit, while the other 3 are confirmed to be present at the G7 summit. So, in fact, there was a statement that was made by US President Donald Trump just a short while ago. I'm assuming this must have been made while he was on his official aircraft on the way to Evian. He has reassured the media, saying that ships have started to move in the Strait of Hormuz. Many are loaded up with oil and they are moving out of Strait of Hormuz, indicating that there has been a complete, the Strait of Hormuz has been secured, it has been reopened, and it's no longer under the blockade of Iranian military. In fact, just a short while ago, there was a response that had been, there was an address that had been made by the Indian Shipping Ministry. They gave a confirmation that there has been an Indian LNG commercial vessel that in fact has passed through the Strait of Hormuz. So that gives us positive indication that in fact there is movement of these commercial vessels transiting through the strait.
And also, as we know that not long ago, like you just mentioned, Trump has put out these Truth Social posts confirming that there is movement now in the Strait of Hormuz. This is coming at a very critical time, of course, as he is landing in France, and this breakthrough has come at a very good time for him, as this is the G7 meet coming up within these next couple of days. What is going on right now with leaders? What is the situation on ground telling us with how they're reacting? What is going on between all of these who are seeing these reactions come and they're also taking them in very positively?
Yes, the French President Emmanuel Macron was first amongst all the leaders across the globe who came out and supported and backed this truce that has been very delicately negotiated between the 2 parties, which is United States of America and Iran. There has, of course, been the Lebanese president who has also made a statement to that effect, Joseph Aoun. Not just that, there have been leaders from the European Union. The EU president held that press conference earlier in the day today, and she started her conversation with an affirmation on the support European Union is giving to this truce that has finally been struck between these 2 countries. But besides the West Asia crisis, there are other issues that that the G7 leaders are seeking answers from, particularly Donald Trump. Of course, number 1 on the agenda is the tariff issue, which has been a point of concern amongst the G7 nations, but and largely in Europe, because there has been tariff threats and proposals of new tariffs that have been made public by the US Department of Commerce and the Trump administration, which Europe and G7, particularly the G6 nations, particularly are vehemently refusing to accept. So that's going to be on the agenda. There has been a lot of talk that has been made, and this is one of the key pointers of the agenda that France has set, President Macron has set for the G7 summit, which is about the restrictions that need to be put in force for children, for teenagers. In fact, remember, there are a number of countries, including United Kingdom and Australia and Indonesia and others that have, and France as well, for that matter, who have restricted the use of social media, the use of digital media under the age of 16. That is a point that is going to be discussed in great detail in those sessions and meetings that are going to be held within the G7 group. Besides that, the economic upheavals, the global economic crisis that the world is witnessing, energy crisis that has brought about a complete halt to the economies of the countries, Europe, across the globe, whether it's Europe, Africa, Southeast Asia, Indian subcontinent, they all are facing the same issue. And that is going to be, of course, a point that is going to be raised during these meetings. Ukraine, of course, the Ukraine-Russia conflict continues to be, continues to be big on the agenda. In fact, President Volodymyr Zelensky has once again been invited to the G7 summit. He's going to be arriving here tomorrow. He's going to hold that very important bilateral meeting with President Trump as well. But in terms of, is there any forward movement on whether there can be a plausible truce that happens between Russia and Ukraine is something that needs to be awaited. Whether there is any resolution, any outcomes that come out, it seems bleak at this point for U.S. President Donald Trump to take any strong decisions with regards to the funding that has been sought by Ukraine, with regards to the military support that has been sought by President Zelensky. So all these matters are out on the table, and we will have to see what emerges out of these meetings.
Of course. Megha, thank you so much for joining us here and giving us all the updates from France. Thank you. Now, turning to the sidelines of the G7 summit in Evian-les-Bains, anti-poverty advocates are staging sharp starticle and protest against world leaders. Jan Kilsky from Oxfam joins NewsX World on the ground to detail the organisation's famous big heads caricatures taking aim at the wealthy nations for dropping the ball on the global crises. Let's cut across.
Hi, I'm Megha, and I am at the G7 Evian 2026 summit. Joining me right now is Jan Kalinski, and he's from Oxfam. Jan is going to tell me a lot about what Oxfam is up to over here. And before actually I speak to you, Jan, you explained to me if I could, show this particular press release that has been shared by Jan to me. It says Oxfam, quote unquote, big heads at the G7 summit in Evian. There are a number of causes that you are raising on the sidelines of the G7 summit. If you could tell me what happened. I mean, this is, of course, a caricature of the G7 leaders and the issues that you would actually want them to raise, but they're not raising it. They're not deliberating and talking about it and doing something constructive about it.
Exactly. So this is a kind of constructive criticism, a little bit of satire as well. So we have been using these, we call them big heads, over the years at G20 summit, at climate conferences, COPs, at G7 summit, and also in the past at the WTO negotiations way back. That's where it started. Yeah, what are we going to do? I mean, this year we know that the world is in geopolitical crisis. This time caused by President Trump and Israel, and with the war against Iran, and the Iran kind of unlawful kind of strikes on different countries in the region. So we have a geopolitical crisis, which also manifests itself at the crisis for energy, for food, for fertilizers. And by these crises and by these price increases, normally it's the poorest in the world who are hit worst. I mean, the low-income countries, middle-income countries. And that's what we want to highlight. Mm-hmm. And we want the G7 to take action. Because if you come, I mean, it's the fifth or fourth crisis in a row. And those poor countries really struggle. But if you look back at COVID-19 or when Russia, started its war against Ukraine, there was also a crisis, economic turmoil, and, prices had gone up and so on. But at that time, being it not perfect, but at that time the G7 acted, and they had a rescue package. For example, they granted debt relief to poor countries, high indebted countries. They increased their development assistance. They issued, or they made it happen that new special drawing rights were issued by the IMF and so on and so forth. So we had a rescue package, which we don't see today. Right? And even under Trump, we know what it's like. He doesn't even want to talk about climate change, about gender justice, about development. And that's what we're criticizing in our first action. Macron was so desperate to have Trump here to attend the summit because he also wanted the political success. but for what price? So the price of a handshake, and the price is we don't talk about all these important issues just to get Trump here. At the same time, we also criticize that the G6, let's say, without the US, right? Even if the US doesn't want to do these things, and even if they dismantle US aid, which is a catastrophe, the others shouldn't kind of hide behind him. They themselves cut the development assistance, the G7 altogether, by 29% in 2025 compared to 2024. That's 48 billion US dollars they cut, right? And as said, normally we would have needed money to invest in big countries. And on the other hand, I think the money is there. The people always say, oh, there's no money. But at the same time, and we calculated that, especially for the G7, we could have also included India, but that we might do that for the G20. For the G7, we calculated that the billionaires, those very super rich people in the G7 countries, in the same period where their governments cut the development aid by 48 billion, it would have taken them 9 days to earn that money, right? So the money is there. So, and what we are demanding from the G7 now is kind of rescue package, tax the windfall profits which people have because of the crisis. Energy sector, fertilizer. There are a lot of losers, but there are a lot of winners as well. So we see a reshuffle from wealth from the poor to the billionaires, which is bizarre. So we want that the government tax them. Then we have some money for, investing in good things. We want that the development assistance is, increased again, not cut, not drastically cut, not cut at all, increased. We want that there's debt relief granted, like it was done when we had the COVID crisis or, the other crisis. We could repeat that. And we want that, again, new special drawing rights will be issued, and also made available for the poor countries, and not just for the rich. So that's what we are doing here. So we are doing another one tomorrow.
Yeah, this is also interesting because you're raising the issue of human rights.
Exactly.
The right to water.
Yeah, and
which is at this point of time not provided to the people who are living in Gaza.
No, we are just talking about now. Everybody is hoping that there will be a kind of agreement that the war ends between Iran and USA.
Yeah.
But at the same time, nobody notices that in Gaza we still have a humanitarian catastrophe, and that's why we symbolize it with clean water, with drinking water. Evian here is famous for good quality water. That's why we position the G7 leaders around the table, drinking nice clean water. And in the middle, there's a big bottle with dirty water, what the people in Gaza have to drink. It's just, we pointed, we want to...
big contrast.
And the other one, this is the, we have the World Championship, the World Soccer Championship. And we just use it as a kind of symbol. We address in that time, it's interestingly only the G6, because Italy didn't cut their ODA, so we had to be correct and fair. But all the others, they drastically cut their ODA, and they will be shown the red card by Oxfam for doing that. And they are not the World Cup champions, but they are the World Aid Cut champions, right? So that's why we want to, with these issues, we try to get to circumvene, the official ways and get into the media with our picture, but not just with the picture, but also because the picture carries a message. And that's what we do here.
Right, absolutely. You also spoke about a media briefing that you're going to hold tomorrow. What is the agenda? What is it that you want to broadcast through the journalists, through media, to send your message out?
This media briefing was sent to the journalists already before. So that contains almost all what I've said now. We are in a crisis. G7 doesn't act. They should act. Otherwise, they will, become even more irrelevant. They should have this rescue package, which I was just talking about. And also they should, if the US doesn't want, they must not hide behind the kind of unwillingness to act by the US and being unwilling themselves. So they can form new coalitions, and do things. It goes beyond G6 and G7, sorry. It goes beyond G7. It's on climate change. If the US doesn't want to do, okay, forge other alliances on taxing, the super rich in the world, because there have been very good initiatives by the Brazilian G20 2 years ago. Just do it without the US, just do it. And the same applies for fighting poverty, upholding human rights, etc.
Okay. Jan, thank you very much for talking to us on NewsX.
Thanks.
And that's all we have time for. Keep watching NewsX World for more news updates from around the world.
World leaders are gathering at the G7 summit taking place here in France. As Iran and the United States agreed to a ceasefire, world leaders welcome the Iran-US peace deal. The G7 leaders get into a huddle with the Gulf heads of states. Can G7 ensure the ceasefire holds? I'm Megha Sharma and I'm bringing you all the news and updates from the G7 Evian 2026 summit only on NewsX World.
आज का भारत सिर्फ आगे नहीं बढ़ रहा, भारत खुद को नेक्स्ट लेवल पर ले जा रहा है.
Together with my friend Prime Minister Modi, who I was pleased to see again last night, we took on our bilateral relationship and raised it to its highest level ever.
We need new answers. That's why we are coming to India.
And as a citizen of Nepal, India's closest neighbor, I feel a deep sense of pride and optimism seeing this stride.
In the midst of this, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.
The world's biggest sporting spectacular is finally here. From breathtaking goals to unforgettable drama. Get closer to every match, every story, and every turning point in this tournament. Catch the latest updates, expert analysis, and match highlights here on NewsX World. The 2026 FIFA World Cup is officially underway, and over the next month, football's biggest nations will battle for glory on the sport's grandest stage. From stunning goals and dramatic upsets to the stars and stories shaping this tournament, we've got it all covered. I'm Ellie Richardson, and this is the NewsX World FIFA World Cup special. And your headlines for today are: four-time champions Germany open their World Cup campaign in the emphatic fashion, sweeping aside debutants Curaçao 7-1 in Houston. The dominant performance immediately signals their intent and puts the rest of the tournament on notice. Japan and the Netherlands played out a dramatic 2-2 draw in Dallas in one of the standout early Group E clashes. The result keeps the group finally balanced as Sweden moved to the top after the opening round of matches. Spain have been handed a major boost with Lamine Yamal cleared to feature in their opening Group H match against Cape Verde. The young winger's return from injury strengthens Spain's attacking opposition as they begin their World Cup campaign. Alexander Serafin has faced criticism from participating nations after describing some matches in the expanded 48-team format as uninteresting. Coaches and players across the tournament have pushed back, defending the competitiveness and value of the new World Cup structure. And we start this show with the Germany-Curaçao game, as Germany start their World Cup campaign with a statement 7-1 win over debutants Curaçao in Houston. Felix Nemanja struck early with a curling finish, but Curaçao shocked the Giants through Comencia to level it up. Nico Schlosberg and Kai Havertz restored control before half-time with a header, and calm penalty Jamal Musiala hit within seconds of the restart to crush any hope of a comeback. Germany then turned on the style with goals from Brown, Undav and Havertz again to complete a 7-1 demolition. Germany delivered the most dominant performance of the FIFA World Cup so far, crushing tournament debutants Curaçao 7-1 in Houston to open their Group E campaign in fashion. The four-time world champions wasted little time taking control as Felix Nemanja opened the scoring after just 6 minutes with a superb curling finish. But Curaçao stunned the German supporters in the 21st minute when Levano Comencia scored the nation's first ever World Cup goal to level the match at 1-1. Any hopes of an upset were short-lived. Nico Schlosberg restored Germany's lead with a header in the 38th minute before Kai Havertz converted a penalty in first half stoppage time to make it 3-1 at the break. Germany then took complete control after half-time when Jamal Musiala scoring the 2 minutes into the second half. Nathaniel Brown added in a fifth in the 68th minute. Substitute Dines Undav made it 6 in the 78th, and Havertz completed his brace with a classy finish in the 88th minute. Germany dominated possession, controlled the midfield and created chances almost at will. Curaçao showed courage going forward and created a historic moment through Comencia's goal. But they simply could not cope with Germany's relentless attacking quality. Germany came to Houston with a point to prove, and they made it loud and clear. 7 goals, total control, and a statement victory that sends an early warning to the rest of the tournament. We are now being joined by Luke Carsley, who's a former Australian international footballer. He is currently head coach of Auckland FC, as well as holding the position of assistant coach with the first team. Thank you so much for joining us here today, Luke, on FIFA World Cup coverage here on NewsX World. Now, my first question to you is, Germany opened their World Cup campaign with a stunning 7-1 victory over Curaçao. After years of early exits and rebuilding, was this the clearest sign yet that Germany's revival on the world stage is complete?
Oh, look, I don't think so. Obviously, it's a massive achievement for Curaçao to be at the World Cup. I watched in March earlier this year, Curaçao came to Australia and played Australia in a friendly match, and Australia won 5-1. So to me, it's not really a surprise that Germany were able to sort of comfortably navigate the game, though, you know, Curaçao started pretty brightly, actually. Although Germany scored first and scored early, they did really well and scored their goal, and it actually felt like the hydration break came at a good time for Germany. It felt like there was a decent little bit of momentum for Curaçao, but in the end, look, the class of Germany showed, and yeah, it was a really difficult task for Curaçao. But no, I wouldn't think that that's a sign that Germany are back, so to speak. But obviously, winning the first game, plus 6 goal difference, they've basically got a foot into the second round or the knockout stages already. So positive signs for Germany, but I think a lot tougher tests to come ahead of them.
And for Curaçao, simply reaching their first ever World Cup was a historic achievement, despite the heavy defeats. What can they learn from facing one of the tournament's favourites, and how important is this experience for the development of football in the country? Yeah,
look, it's massive. Like as you said, like just the achievement of qualifying for the World Cup is enormous. I think that's the beauty of the 48-team World Cup, that we get to see these nations experience a World Cup with the additional teams. Yeah, look, what they can learn. Look, for me, I would really like them to take the positivity out of the start of the game and kind of know that when they really put their best foot forward, they can be a threat. So I think it's better to do that than to maybe you respect the opposition a bit too much and sit back and all that kind of stuff. But I think they also would have learnt that, you know, if you leave any space and any opportunities for the better teams, that you're going to get punished, and any mistakes defensively will be punished. So yeah, loads to learn, but also I think from the, you know, that first 22 and a half minutes or whatever it was until the hydration break went, that they actually showed that they have some real quality. They're a threat on the counter-attack. They got their goal, and if they can remain really positive, then perhaps, yeah, some good results can come their way.
And it's important not to overreact to one result, particularly against a World Cup debutant like Curaçao. But after scoring 7 goals in their opener, should Germany now be considered genuine contenders alongside favourites such as Argentina, Spain and France?
No, not on that result. Look, you know, maybe not so much recently, but over the years, kind of over the last 100 years, Germany have been a fantastic tournament team. They generally do well at tournaments, so I definitely wouldn't count Germany out, but I also, you know, wouldn't be getting too far ahead, and I'm sure they wouldn't be getting too far ahead of themselves. You know, with a result like that against Curaçao, it's almost expected, really.
Thank you, Luke. Stay with us, please, as I'll be joining back with you very shortly. Now up next, Japan stunned the Netherlands late to grab a 2-2 draw in their World Cup Group F clash in Dallas after a tight first half. Somerville broke the deadlock in the 64th minute with a curling finish off the post of the Netherlands. Locked in control, but Japan kept pushing through Kito Nakumba and Usei Udia. Testing the defence, substitute Koki Ogawa then came in a big late on his header, deflected in off Daichi Kamada. To restore parity, Japan once again showed their trademark resilience to deny the Dutch and take hard-fought points. Now, to break this down, 2 of the tournament's most highly rated sides shared the points in one of the biggest and best matches in this FIFA World Cup so far, as the Netherlands and Japan played out an entertaining 2-2 draw in Texas. After a cautious first half, this game exploded into life after the break. The Netherlands struck first in the 51st minute when captain Virgil van Dijk powered home a header. Japan responded almost immediately with Kito Nakumba firing in a low finish in the 57th minute to level the score 1-1. The Dutch regained the lead in the 64th minute through Sissenko Somerville, who curled a superb left-footed strike into the far corner for his first international goal. However, just when it looked like Ronald Koeman's side would claim all 3 points, Japan struck again in the 89th minute. Daichi Kamada blended home a corner after a flick from Koki Ogawa, rescuing a deserved point. The Netherlands enjoyed more of the ball for much of the contest and controlled possession, finishing off with roughly 60% of the possession. But Japan's energy, pressing and ability to respond after falling behind twice proved crucial. The Netherlands looked set to leave Dallas with all 3 points, but Japan refused to go away. Twice they came from behind, twice they answered the Dutch challenge, and in the end, dramatic late equaliser ensured that the points were shared in the thrilling World Cup encounter. We are once again being joined by Luke Castley. Thank you so much for joining us back here. Now, the Netherlands were twice in front, but twice pegged back by Japan in an entertaining 2-2 draw. Is this a case of Japan's resilience shining through, or will the Dutch be frustrated at letting a winning position slip away?
I think any team that's leading twice and doesn't go on to win the match and get the 3 points will always be disappointed. And I think Ronald Koeman referenced that post-game, that, you know, leading twice, it's, you know, you don't want to not walk away with full points. But I'm a big fan of this Japanese team and Japanese football in general. You know, look, I really think if Japan have that, it's kind of part of their, you know, their culture and their DNA, that they're very respectful and they respect the opposition. And I really think if they have that little bit more, you know, almost arrogance within themselves and belief within themselves, that they can go a long, long way. So they're a fantastic team, and, you know, a draw against Holland, in their performances in the warm-up games against Scotland, against England were fantastic. So yeah, look, 2 heavyweights in this group, I think. But yeah, look, an excellent performance from both teams overall. But yeah, I really think Japan actually could have stepped forward and won the game. But in saying that, as I said earlier, yeah, the Netherlands will be disappointed, having led, that they didn't go on with the win.
And Japan have built a reputation for troubling some of football's biggest nations at recent World Cups. Did this comeback performance reinforce their status as one of Asia's strongest teams and potential dark horses in this tournament?
Yeah, they're the best team in Asia, and they have been for some time. You know, and you look at the clubs that their players are playing for, and the amount of players that they have, you know, doing really well in good leagues in Europe. I'm a big fan. I really think they can go a long way. Like, it's a bit difficult with the draw now, with the third place teams going through and who will come across who in the knockout stages. But I really think Japan can go a long way. I definitely think they're a dark horse in this tournament.
And for the Netherlands, there were positives going forward, but questions defensively after conceding twice. Does this result expose vulnerabilities that stronger opponents could look to exploit later in the tournament?
Yeah, look, it's hard to say. You know, it's the first game for everybody, and teams will build into the tournament. You know, we know the quality of, you know, in particular, Van Dijk and Van de Ven at the back for the Netherlands. But, you know, Van Dijk, I think there was a few years ago, he was by far the best central defender in the world. But yeah, you know, he's enormously experienced. He was a threat on the set pieces. He got his goal, but yeah, I do think he's not quite at the peak of his powers anymore. There's obviously a lot of experience that he has, but yeah, look, you know, if, you know, the deeper they go into this tournament, you know, Japan scored 2, could have scored 1 or 2 more. They'll certainly have to tighten that up if they want to go a fair way into this tournament.
Now up next, Ivory Coast snatch a late 1-0 win over Ecuador in the World Cup Group E opener in Philadelphia, Amad Diallo, stole the headlines with a 90th minute winner. After a tight and intense contest, Ecuador hit the woodwork twice in the first half and continued to threaten but could not find a finish. Ivory Coast struck also at the bar after the break before finally breaking through in the dying moments. Diallo composed finish to secure a huge opening win as they now prepare to face Germany next. To break this down more, the Ivory Coast left it late, but they opened their FIFA World Cup campaign with a dramatic 1-0 victory over Ecuador in the Philadelphia, thanks to last-minute winner from Amad Diallo. The match was tightly contested throughout, with Ecuador arguably creating the better chances early on. John Yoba and Alan Minda both struck the crossbar during a lively first half, while Ivory Coast also threatened through Eli Wahai as neither side could find a breakthrough before half-time. Ecuador enjoyed slightly more of the ball in the opening stages, but Ivory Coast grew into the contest as the match progressed. The second half saw the Ivorians take greater control of possession and territory, with youngster Yan Diamonde causing problems down the flanks and Ecuador increasingly forced into the back foot. Just when the game appeared destined for goalless draw, the decisive moment arrived in the 90th minute. Wilfred Singo surged down the right wing before finding Amad Diallo, who calmly fired into the back far corner to spark wild celebrations among the Ivory Coast supporters. Ecuador finished with a more completed passes, but Ivory Coast registered more shots on target and looked the strong side during the closing stages. For 89 minutes, nothing could separate these two talented sides, but World Cups are often decided by moments, and Amad Diallo delivered one when it mattered most. A 90th minute winner, 3 priceless points, and a dream start for that side in Group E. Once again, being joined by Luke Carsley. Thank you for joining us back here for this. Now, the Ivory Coast opened their World Cup campaign with a hard-fought 1-0 victory over Ecuador. How important could those 3 points prove to be, and what many expected to be a tightly contested group?
Yeah, I think those 3 points will be massive. I really enjoyed watching that game. The game could have gone either way. Ecuador had a really good chance early on from inside the box. They hit the crossbar twice in the game. Ivory Coast hit the crossbar as well. So it's a game that really could have gone either way. You know, the stats will show that Ecuador just had the one shot on target. But as I said, they hit the crossbar twice. There was some really good football played in this tournament. They had a cracking strike from just outside the box early in the second half that really stung the goalkeeper's hands. And if that was either side of the keeper, it could have caused them some real trouble. So Ivory Coast got the 3 points, and I think on the balance of that game, that ends up a really big result for them, because that one could have really gone either way.
And for Ecuador, this is an early setback against direct rival for qualification. How concerned should they be after failing to convert opportunities? And does the pressure now increase significantly heading into their next match?
So obviously they play Curacao next, so they'll expect to win that game, and they'll need to win that comfortably to stay in contention. You know, everyone's talking about you get to 4 points, you'll get out of your group. So it's a big opportunity for them to do that. Obviously they play Germany last, so this match that they play against Curacao is massive for them. It's a must-win for them to stay in the tournament. Like I expect them to beat Curacao. It's just yeah, that will goal difference come into playing a factor in it.
And we've already seen strong performances from teams like South Korea, Australia, and now Ivory Coast. Could this World Cup be remembered for the success of emerging nations rather than the traditional favourites, considering the fact it is now the biggest World Cup in history?
Yeah, for sure. I really believe that this World Cup, I think every World Cup has their almost surprise packets. You know, we saw how well Morocco did at the last World Cup. And there's always someone that does better than you expect. But this format, the larger format, and once you go into those knockout games where it's one game on one day, anything can happen. I'm convinced, yeah, that we'll see some big surprises in this tournament. I'm looking forward to it.
And Sweden go to the top of Group F with a commanding win over Tunisia in the World Cup in Monterrey. Yasin Arari opened the scoring with a powerful long-range strike before Alexander Isak doubled the lead after a brilliant setup from Victor Gyökeres. Tunisia briefly struck back through Omar Reek, but Sweden never lost control of the game in the second half. Isak and Gyökeres linked up again to restore the 2-goal buffer. Late strikes from Mattia and Arya sealed a dominant performance as Sweden cruised to a 4-1 victory. Sweden produced one of the most impressive performances of the FIFA World Cup so far, cruising to a dominant 5-1 victory over Tunisia to take early control of Group F. Sweden's attacking trio of Alexander Isak, Victor Gyökeres and Yasin Arari proved too much for Tunisia, who struggled to cope with the pace and movement throughout the match. The Swedes struck early when Yasin Arari fired home a superb long-range effort to the 7th minute. Their dominance continued and Alexander Isak doubled their lead in the 30th minute after a rapid counter-attack. Tunisia briefly got themselves back into the contest before half-time went and Omar Reek headed home from a Hannibal cross in the 43rd minute to make it 2-1. Any hopes of Tunisian comeback disappeared after the break as Victor Gyökeres restored Sweden's 2-goal cushion in the 59th minute after combining brilliantly with Isak. Sweden continued to dominate possession and territory and substitute Mattias Svanberg added a 4th in the 84th minute. Irie then completed his brace deep into stoppage time, scoring in the 90th stoppage time minutes to cap a memorable night for Graham Potter's side. Sweden didn't just win, they made a statement. 5 goals, complete control and standout performances have announced the Scandinavians as a serious threat in Group F and beyond. Once again, we are being joined by Luke Carsley. Thank you for joining us back here once again. Now, Sweden made one of the strongest statements of their opening round with a commanding 5-1 victory over Tunisia. Was this simply an impressive start or a performance that should make the rest of the tournament sit up and take notice?
Yeah, look, it's an interesting one. I take a lot of interest in Sweden. I lived in Sweden in my playing days, and my daughter was born there, so kind of a second home for me. And you know, 2 of their stars today, Ayari and Isak, came from the same club I played for, AIK in Stockholm. So have a lot of interest in the Sweden team. You know, I think the performance today was interesting. They obviously, it's a massive result. You know, a 5-1 win in a World Cup game is enormous. Though I'm not so sure the performance was kind of like that. It was 8 attempts on target and 5 goals. So, you know, and maybe 1 or 2 question marks on the Tunisian goalkeeper on a couple of those goals. But yeah, look, I'm you know, Sweden, that they had to go to the playoff series and struggled to qualify for the tournament and did really well to qualify. So I'm not expecting Sweden to be a big threat, but that will certainly give them an enormous amount of confidence, that first match and that first performance. And again, you know, you win your first game and you're almost got 1 foot into the knockout stages where anything can happen.
And for Tunisia, a 4-goal defeat is a difficult way to begin the tournament. How do they recover from a result like this? And does it leave them with very little margin for error in the matches ahead?
Yeah, I think it's going to be really difficult now. When you look at the group, as I mentioned, I'm a big fan of Japan. We know how strong the Netherlands are. So Tunisia would have been looking at the game against Sweden as their real opportunity to get points. And with that not happening, I think it's going to be really tough for them now. They have Japan next. And if they don't get anything out of that game, then yeah, it's going to be really difficult having to play the Netherlands last. So yeah, I think it's going to be really difficult for Tunisia now. I think it's going to be really tough. They might struggle to get any points in this.
And thank you to Luke for joining us here today on our FIFA World Cup coverage. It's an absolute pleasure being able to speak with you. Now, for your upcoming match of tonight, Spain begins their World Cup campaign of 2026 as strong favourites against Cape Verde in Atlanta. La Roja arrived with a huge momentum after winning Euro 2024 and a 30-match unbeaten run since March 2024. Lamine Yamal, Pedri and Gavi lead a new golden generation, and that has reignited Spanish dominance. Bookmakers rate Spain top title contenders, with France close behind in the race for World Cup glory. All eyes now on whether Spain can turn their unbeaten form into a long-awaited World Cup crown. The next match on is Seattle opens its World Cup 2026 journey with a blockbuster Group G clash between Belgium and Egypt at Lumen Field. Setting the stage for a high-stakes opener, Belgium arrive with their golden generation led by Romelu Lukaku, Kevin De Bruyne and Thibaut Courtois, aiming for one last deep run that could define their era. Jeremy Doku and Charles de Ketelaere bring fresh energy into the squad as Rudy Garcia tries to blend experience with youth to keep Belgium competitive. Egypt returned to the World Cup led by Mohamed Salah, carrying the hope of making a strong statement on the big stage after years of waiting. With Belgium holding the historical edge and Egypt hungry to flip the script, this opening clash builds into a title battle where momentum could shift quickly. Next, Saudi Arabia opened their World Cup 2026 campaign against Uruguay in a high-stakes Group H clash in Miami. Setting the stage for a tough start to the tournament journey, the Green Falcons head into the competition as underdogs but carry memories of their shock win over Argentina in 2022, which still fuels belief in big moments. Head coach has had limited time to build his system, but insists his side are ready to compete, bringing structure and discipline into the team. Captain Salem Al-Doswari leads the attack, while Firas Al-Barakan provides the main goal threat up front, giving Saudi Arabia their key offensive outlets. With a fit squad and high motivation connecting all the way through, Saudi Arabia now have hope to start strong against a powerful Uruguay side in a match that could define their group stage. And lastly, Iran face New Zealand in their World Cup 2026 Group G opener in a crucial early morning clash that could shape both teams' tournament path, setting the tone for the campaign from very first whistle. Iran entered with history and experience as they aim for their first ever knockout stage, while New Zealand arrives seeking their first World Cup win ever, making both sides equally hungry for breakthrough moments. Iran's long qualification run against Asian heavyweights has built resilience and depth, while Mehdi Taremi and Alireza Bernavad leading their charge and carrying their team big match expectation. New Zealand, in contrast, have come through a shorter but intense preparation phase, testing themselves against global opposition with Chris Wood as their main striking force and primary target in attack. And that's all for today in our special coverage of the FIFA World Cup 2026 on World of Sports. Thank you for joining us. Be sure to tune in again tomorrow at the same time as we bring you all the latest results, breaking news, expert analysis and highlights from this FIFA World Cup.
World leaders are gathering at the G7 summit taking place here in France. As Iran and the United States agreed to a ceasefire, world leaders welcome the Iran-US peace deal. The G7 leaders get into a huddle with the Gulf heads of states. Can G7 ensure the ceasefire holds? I'm Megha Sharma and I'm bringing you all the news and updates from the G7 Avian 2026 summit only on NewsX World.
आज का भारत सिर्फ आगे नहीं बढ़ रहा, भारत खुद को नेक्स्ट लेवल पर ले जा रहा है.
Together with my friend Prime Minister Modi, who I was pleased to see again last night, we took on our bilateral relationship and raised it to its highest level ever.
We need new answers. That's why we are coming to India.
And as a citizen of Nepal, India's closest neighbor, I feel a deep sense of pride and optimism seeing stride.
Hello and welcome. I'm Ellie Richardson and you are watching the World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top headlines of this hour. The US and Iran said they have agreed terms to end their war and reopen the Strait of Hormuz, news that brought relief to markets worldwide. Although the pact may hinge on events in Lebanon and defers tricky talks on Tehran's nuclear program. US President Donald Trump said that many ships loaded with oil are starting to move out of the Strait of Hormuz, mentioning ships are starting to move many loaded up with oil out of the strait. They are going along the southern highway, said by Trump in his Truth Social post. US Vice President JD Vance has said he hopes that a text of an agreement to halt the war in Iran and open the Strait of Hormuz will be released this week, as further negotiations over the deal's details were set to continue. Vance also said the United States expects the economically vital waterway would be open without tolls in a long-term basis. Lebanon remains the flashpoint of the ceasefire as Israel vows to keep its forces in the south despite the new agreement. Iran demands a complete halt to Israeli strikes while displaced families begin cautiously returning home. France and Britain are pushing plans for a multinational naval mission in safeguard to shipping through the Strait of Hormuz if a US-Iran ceasefire materialises, although it is doubtful whether Tehran would be prepared to accept any such operation. Diplomats say that Iran has signalled strong opposition to any foreign military presence in the waterway. A historic Kyiv monastery burns after a massive overnight Russian assault on the Ukrainian capital, killing 9 in the process. Moscow denies striking the site directly, blaming the damage on Ukrainian Patriot missile during the barrage. Britain moves to ban social media for all children under 16 as Prime Minister Keir Starmer pledges to protect young people's well-being. The sweeping announcement follows similar moves across Australia and Europe to curb children's online access. The stepson of Norway's Crown Prince Haakon is found guilty of rape and domestic violence. The court sentenced him to 4 years in prison after a 7-week trial that has shaken the royal family's image. And we start this hour with some breaking news from Washington as a senior US official confirms that the United States has officially signed a comprehensive memorandum of understanding with Iran, making an immediate cessation of the 3-month-old conflict. According to high-level administration sources, the sweeping agreement is personally signed by President Donald Trump and Vice President JD Vance, with the Iranian parliamentary speaker executing the document on behalf of Tehran. The senior official emphasized that historic framework provides the immediate, unconditional and reopening of the strategically vital Strait of Hormuz and simultaneous lifting of the intense US naval blockade on Iran. Shipping and intelligence sources confirm that global maritime operators are already responding to the diplomatic breakthrough, with a significant increase in commercial cargo traffic starting to move through the crucial choke point right now. We are now being joined by Erik Solheim, who is a former Norway minister, joining us live from Ahmedabad. Thank you so much, Erik, for joining us here today on NewsX World. Pleasure, as always, to be able to have you on. Now, with this breaking news coming in that a senior US official confirms the United States has officially signed this MOU. What does this now mean for this stage of the peace talks? Are we finally getting somewhere where, as reported, in the next 60 days, it will be honed in on to make sure there is a complete end to this conflict?
That is very hard to think. Of course, the entire world is having a breath, a sigh of relief. This is enormously relieving to many people, particularly in poor parts of the world. But look, this is one of the most meaningless wars in world history, and that's a hard competition. But we are back to February with no major changes, except, of course, that the United States of America has demonstrated to the entire world the limits of its powers. It cannot even dominate a third-rate power like Iran. The government of Iran, which looked very weak back in February, now looks much, much stronger and has got a new tool in their repertoire. They can use the Strait of Hormuz to dominate the world. And thirdly, the entire world has become poorer. None of these were intended, but we are back to February, just in a different place, and particularly the clear demonstration to the world of the limits to American power, I think, is the outcome of this war at this point.
And commercial shipping is reportedly already returning to the Strait of Hormuz. Could the immediate resumption of maritime traffic rapidly lower energy market volatility and strengthen global economic confidence, or are businesses likely to remain cautious until the agreement is fully implemented?
I guess both of those are true. I mean, you will see an immediate impact. We have already seen it. The price of oil has drastically been decreased all over the world, and you will see immediate action in the Strait of Hormuz. But many shipping companies will always be a little reluctant. They will want to see what's coming out of this before they act. And look, we do not know the fine details. We do not know the exact way they will negotiate about the nuclear deal. We do not know what are the fine print on the Strait of Hormuz. It's said that Iran will have a particular say in the Strait of Hormuz. What will that mean? Can Iran levy some taxes or some environment tax, or what can Iran do in the Strait of Hormuz? We do not know as yet. What will be very unlikely is that Iran will accept any kind of global military multilateral force into the Strait. I think that is close to excluded.
And thank you, Eric. Stay with us, please. We have some more breaking news now coming out with this peace agreement. That senior US official on Iran deal, the details of this agreement will be put out within the next 24 to 48 hours. Senior US official on Iran deal is going to launch the technical discussions later this week. Of course, as more news comes out from this, we will bring you it here on News X World. And now up next, Air Force One has officially touched down in Geneva as US President Donald Trump joins G7 leaders in France for a highly anticipated summit dominated by the sudden US-Iran peace framework. Fresh off celebrating his 80th birthday, Trump arrived proclaiming "Let the oil flow," following the announced reopening of the strategic Strait of Hormuz. However, European allies are preparing a barrage of questions for the American president, chiefly centering on Tehran's plans to levy controversial maritime service fees on vessels transiting the waterway. French President Emmanuel Macron has declared the international law must be defended, vowing that no toll will be accepted to enrich Tehran. The three-day summit remains a volatile diplomatic balancing act. Macron is managing a tense bilateral dispute over French digital taxes, which Trump has threatened to retaliate against a 100% tariff on French wine and champagne. Furthermore, the focus will pivot sharply tomorrow to Eastern Europe. Ukraine President Volodymyr Zelensky is arriving to demand a decisive response from G7 leaders following a brutal Russian missile barrage in Kyiv that killed 11 people and severely damaged a landmark cathedral. Zelensky revealed he proposed a meeting with Vladimir Putin at the summit, but Moscow has reportedly refused. We are now being joined by both Eric Solheim, once again, and also being joined by Volodymyr Ozymyshyn, who is a former Minister of Infrastructure of Ukraine, joining us live from London. Thank you to the both of you for joining us here today on News X World. Now, Eric, if I could please come to you. President Donald Trump arrived at the G7 declaring, "Let the oil flow," but European leaders are challenging Iran's proposed maritime service fees in the Strait of Hormuz. Is the world witnessing a birth of a new energy corridor, or is this beginning of a fresh geopolitical dispute over freedom of navigation?
All that G7 looks very much as an organization of has-beens. It originated at a time when Europe and America, the West, dominated the world, and it comes from a time where the West was united. Now the West is not united and is not dominating. So the G7 has run out of steam, and there may be a lot of important bilateral meetings happening in France, but as an institution, it looks like a has-been institution. I mean, the real institution of today's world are like the G2, meetings between President Xi and President Trump. It's the G20, where all the major powers are around. It's like the APEC, which is very important. And you can add on, I mean, you have the BRICS, you have the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, you have the UN. G7 look very much as a has-been organization. Whether there will be some major initiatives on energy coming from this meeting, I really doubt it, because there is no real unity as to what should be done.
And Volodymyr Omelan, please, if I could come to you now for this. With G7 leaders grapple with Middle East diplomacy over this, but also Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky arriving at after a deadly Russian missile attack on Kyiv. Reports that Moscow rejected his proposal for a summit meeting with Putin. Can G7 leaders still influence the trajectory of the war, or is the diplomatic momentum shifting elsewhere?
I believe that there is no diplomatic momentum anymore. Many countries still would like to pretend that there is a peaceful solution to this war in Europe, but it's very unlikely that it will come one day. Yes, indeed, Russia today hit one of the ancient churches in Europe, which was founded before Notre Dame de Paris and Westminster Abbey. And it's another clear sign that Putin fights not only Ukraine, he fights history and future, because there is nothing left for Russia when it fails. I still hope that G7 will be that venue when we get some clarity about plans of great powers, how at least Europe shall look like and what kind of future can be constructed for European nations, because definitely it's visible that the United States are leaving Europe. And are Europeans ready to fight or ready to protect their values, borders, and nations? It's still an open question, but I do hope that our resolve is present and we finally understand that self-protection is our challenge, not somebody's to protect us.
And Eric, back over to you now, please. As French President Emmanuel Macron has drawn a red line against any Iranian tolls in the Strait of Hormuz, could this issue become the first major test for the West's unity following the US-Iran peace framework, exposing differences between Washington's pragmatism and Europe's legal concerns?
Look, there is no basic unity between the United States and Europe on any major issue at this point. There's been no unity throughout the Iran-US war, not even a complete unity in Europe, but for sure no unity between Europe and the United States. There's no unity as to how to resolve the war in Ukraine, as we just heard from Volodymyr. So there is no real unity between the United States and Europe. What we need to see is a lot more of a Europe which gets its own agency, which stands up for its own values and interests. That is, however, difficult because Europe at the moment have no economic growth. That makes everything more difficult. Europe at the moment has very, very weak leaders. Look to the people who are coming to France. They struggle on a daily basis just to survive in their domestic politics. Macron is very unpopular in France. Starmer will most certainly not survive this year in the United Kingdom. Merz is very unpopular in Germany. And when you're so unpopular at home, it's very, very hard to provide some global leadership. So Europe struggle, but the long-term direction, I agree with Volodymyr, that is clear. Europe must much, much more look into how it can defend its own interest in every way: trade, economics, politics, values, military.
And over to you now, Volodymyr, please. Could the success of diplomacy between the United States and Iran create expectations for renewed diplomatic initiatives on Ukraine and Russia? Or are these two conflicts extremely different, obviously, in their own ways? But is the Ukraine-Russia conflict too far gone now?
Let's first see if there is real success between US and Iran, because this peace deal is only announced yesterday and there were a lot of announcements in the past. What is really unfortunate that to come to this juncture, visit of Mr. Trump was needed to Beijing and his meeting with Xi. And I don't think that it's good for number one state in the world or greatest superpower to consult with the second number or with some another great power. But still, this is the reality we face right now. Trump is very reluctant to push on Putin, and he would like to close his eyes on what's going on in Eastern Europe, in Europe in general. Because unfortunately, the policy of US presidents is basically the same. They don't want to have Europe to be strong. And it's another challenge which European nations are facing, how to be strong, to be a partner in all areas of economy, military, and politics. So I do believe this is the issue only for Ukraine and our European allies to put Putin back to cage. And there is no other opportunity or any other ally will help us in this endeavor. I don't think that President Trump's administration will be forward in this issue. I don't think that China would be very much interested to set the peace in Europe, because they also get their scores in weakening Russia and European nations. China gets its added value in both situations. So it's only our resolve as European nations to put order back in our house.
Thank you to the both of you, Volodymyr and Eric, for joining us here on our special coverage of the G7 summit. Thank you. We now have some breaking news coming in as US President Donald Trump lands in France for G7 summit. We are getting reports of Iran and the US have finally signed the agreement. Some more statements have come in from senior US officials. They have also said that the details on the agreement will be put out within the next 24 to 48 hours. They have also said the relief of frozen funds, sanctions, relief tied to performance. They have further said that the plan is to keep current US military force posture during the next phase of negotiations. We are now being joined by Megha Sharma, who's the Senior Executive Editor of NewsX World, joining us live on the ground in Evian, France herself. Thank you, Megha, for joining us here and giving us your insights. Now, Trump has landed, and while we have reports of US and Iran finally signing this MOU, what do you make of it?
Yes, there is a statement that has come from the Vice President of the United States of America, JD Vance, who has now confirmed that there was a virtual deal that has been signed between Iran and United States on Sunday, which was yesterday. At this point of time, there is no text of the agreement that has been released. This is a statement that has come from US. It has not been confirmed by Iran as yet, but there are conflicting accounts of what happens next after that MOU, the very important MOU that is going to be signed between the two sides in Switzerland. Although at this point of time questions being raised about who is going to be present for the signing of the MOU in Switzerland, in Geneva. Of course, there at this point of time is a statement that has been made by Arakchi, who's the foreign minister of Iran. He made the statement yesterday that the MOU is finally going to be signed in Switzerland. It is going to be signed remotely. Whereas JD Vance has come out and spoken in the media and said that he expects the foreign minister and other top delegates from Iran to be present in Switzerland to sign the deal. So a lot of conflicting statements coming in. At this point in time, US is reluctant in sharing the details, the text of what this agreement is. There is no statement that has come from Iran with regards to any confirmation or denial of this deal that has been signed. But that's what the US side is saying about this entire set of developments taking place.
Thank you, Megha, for joining us here on our special coverage. Thank you. Now, up next, a fragile Middle East peace framework is facing an immediate high-stakes test following reports of a deadly Israeli airstrike in southern Lebanon. According to Lebanese state media, an Israeli drone targeted a vehicle at the Kfar Bint roundabout near the southern city of Nabatea, killing the driver. This marks the very first reported fatal strike since the United States and Iran announced their breakthrough agreement aimed at ending the war across all regional fronts. The strike directly threatens the stability of the tentative truce, as Iran has aggressively insisted that Lebanon be fully integrated into the final peace framework. These strikes come as US President Trump is now at Geneva to attend the G7 summit in neighboring France. And meanwhile, speaking from Tehran, Iranian Foreign Ministry spokesman Ismail Baghai has declared that despite the framework agreement to end the regional war, Iran still holds deep mistrust towards the United States. Baghai has emphasized that the US bears the ultimate responsibility to ensure that Israel completely halts all military operations in Lebanon. Furthermore, Tehran revealed that Washington has committed to two non-negotiable points: the total release of Iran's frozen assets abroad and direct financial preparations for war damages on the economic front. Iran announced plans to implement a mandatory maritime service fees on all cargo ships transiting the crucial Strait of Hormuz, covering navigation assistance, environmental protection and marine insurance, insisting that these are operational fees rather than traditional tolls. Listen in.
آمریکا باید تعهداتش رو انجام بده، تعهداتی که طبق این یادداشت تفاهم متعهد شده نسبت بهشون، و باید اطمینان حاصل بکنه که رژیم صهیونیستی هم تعهدات مربوط به توقف جنگ در لبنان رو اجرا میکنه. آزاد شدن اموال مسدود شده یا محدود شده ایران در کنار موضوع بازسازی خسارات دو موضوع مهم هست از حیث اقتصادی. طرف آمریکایی متعهد میشه که در هر دو مورد اقداماتی رو انجام بده. ما همیشه گفتیم ما به دنبال گرفتن عوارض نیستیم، ولی ما به ازای خدماتی که ارائه خواهیم کرد، خدمات ناوبری، حفاظت از محیط زیست، احیانا بیمه کشتی‌ها و سایر خدماتی که از سوی ایران و عمان ارائه خواهد شد، هزینه‌های لازم رو هم طراحی خواهد شد و دریافت خواهد شد. بنابراین در این زمینه موضوع خیلی
And that is all we have time for this hour. Keep watching NewsX World for more news updates from around the world.
World leaders are gathering at the G7 summit taking place here in France. As Iran and the United States agreed to a ceasefire, world leaders welcome the Iran-US peace deal. The G7 leaders get into a huddle with the Gulf heads of states. Can G7 ensure the ceasefire holds? I'm Megha Sharma and I'm bringing you all the news and updates from the G7 Avian 2026 Summit only on NewsX World.
Hello and welcome, I'm Thomas Porteous and you're watching the World Report here on NewsX World. Let's first take a look at the top headlines leading this hour. The United States and Iran strike a historic framework deal to end their war as President Trump declares the agreement complete. The pact, brokered with Pakistan, heads to Switzerland for a formal signing this